do you think he should at least testify in the same way that Bill and Hillary Clinton did?
There are multiple people who have testified already in these depositions who have said that the president is not implicated in any kind of crime. And even today,
wouldn't you want to hear from the guy? Wouldn't you want to hear right from the horse's mouth?
The moment you hear this exchange, something immediately feels different. This is no longer just a discussion about crime or public safety. The conversation has shifted into something much deeper, the question of accountability itself. Because when standards are applied selectively, the issue is no longer about justice. It becomes about who is expected to answer questions and who is allowed to avoid them.
Well, last night we told you how Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg dropped the charges against a 27-year-old repeat offender who threw chunks of ice at police officers in New York. And remember the horrific murder of Arinka Zerewski in Charlotte, North Carolina. Tonight we just learned about a murder in Virginia that sounds nearly identical. A woman in Fairfax County was randomly stabbed to death at a bus stop by a man who was here illegally from West Africa and had been arrested more than a dozen times. And not to leave out blue state California, where state laws are allowing a convicted child sex offender to run for public office.
Campos is registered on the California Megan's Law website. It's because he was arrested in 2018 after a cyber tip was sent to the local Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force.
We went to this home in Fresno. There we contacted Campos, and we were able to determine that he had been downloading and sharing child sexual abuse material.
So why does it seem like blue states are putting criminals ahead of law?
The framing is clear. Serious crimes are presented first, establishing fear, urgency, and responsibility. But the real test is how this framing holds up under scrutiny.
Me now is progressive YouTuber Tyler Cohen. Brian, great to see you tonight. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
There is a pattern of the soft on crime policies in blue cities and states, putting career criminals ahead of citizens, and now we have deadly results. Do you think that they should be harsher on these types of criminals, or should they continue letting them out of prison?
If you're talking about criminals who commit violent crimes, undocumented immigrants or immigrants who commit violent crimes, should they be deported? Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that is a perfect example of when you and I are probably in full agreement that I want as harsh a penalty as you can get. If somebody commits a sexual crime, a crime against a child, or a violent crime, those are the people who shouldn't be here. But I think it's interesting that you highlighted a sex offender who's running for office, and I agree, or I presume I agree, that we both don't think that somebody like that should be representing Americans. And so I guess my question to you would be, given the fact that Trump himself is named in the Epstein files 38,000 times, do you think he should at least testify in the same way that Bill and Hillary Clinton did?
There are multiple people who have testified already in these depositions who have said that the president is not implicated in any kind of crime. And even today,
wouldn't you want to hear from the guy? Wouldn't you want to hear right from the horse's mouth?
What began as agreement now turns into something else entirely, a direct test of consistency.
I think the president has much bigger issues to deal with, and even today, President Bill Clinton said that he believes the president.
Bigger issues than being implicated in a pedophile ring?
We started the show talking about the Epstein files.
I think
it's interesting that we're now diverting away from the facts on local Democrats letting criminals out of prison who are then going and murdering people at bus stops and on the train on the way home. But I want to get to this.
I think it's a pretty big issue when you have the sitting president of the and frankly, if the president was a Democrat and he was implicated in the biggest sex trafficking ring in the United States, in the history of this country,
I think the word implicated is pretty strong, and I think
how would you know? But how would you know if he doesn't testify?
Because you can read the documents, you can read the emails, and this isn't just about President Trump.
But we have 3 million documents that haven't been released.
Yes, you can. The Epstein thing is a distraction. From what's actually happening from this story that happened just today, where we have an illegal immigrant from West Africa.
You brought up the idea of a registered sex offender.
Yeah, registered convicted sex offender, not the president who was named in files with no evidence at all of criminal wrongdoing. Those are two very.
The conversation shifts again away from the question and back toward the original narrative.
Different things, but I want to get back to the news.
Transparency. Why wouldn't you want some transparency?
There's been plenty of transparency, which is why President Trump signed the legislation to put out the documents.
Do you support the James Comer precedent
has much more important issues
in front of the?
Look, we're completely off base here talking about the Epstein files. I want to ask you this question about what happened in Fairfax County just tonight. We now know that this man was here illegally. He has 30 different arrests, criminal history for rape and malicious wounding. One of the first things that the new Democratic governor of Virginia did, Abigail Spanberger, was cut off cooperation with ICE to turn over violent criminals like this to the federal government so they can be deported. Do you believe that she should cooperate with ICE to get this guy out of the country and to prosecute him so that additional people are not harmed if he's released onto the streets?
I have no problem with ICE cooperating with state governments for violent criminals. I don't agree that states should be cooperating with ICE in instances where it doesn't involve violent criminals.
Even if they have 30 different arrests for rape and malicious wounding?
Well, that sounds like those sound like violent instances, so you have my answer on that.
Despite the tension, both sides quietly reached the same conclusion on violent crime.
So I think we're in agreement there. I think if somebody is a violent criminal, then that's the instance where I think it would be acceptable to cooperate with ICE.
I want to ask you about this. There's new research by Vanderbilt University and Wellesley College saying that when Republican prosecutors are elected, the mortality among young men aged 20 to 29 falls by 6.6%. So do those numbers mean anything to you in terms of reducing crime and the approach that Democrats take to criminals versus Republicans?
No, I'm sorry. I don't really understand what that means.
It means that Republican candidates who are elected as prosecutors, they prosecute criminals and they keep them in prison, in jail. Unlike Democrats, like in Fairfax County, for example, this prosecutor has let out a number of violent criminals back on the streets who then went on to reoffend or murder people. So the difference is that there are more living human beings in these communities as a result of putting violent criminals behind bars rather than releasing them into the community. Should Democrats take a harder stance on crime?
I think for violent criminals, there should be a harsh stance anyway. I'm fully in support of that. Look, I live in Los Angeles, but I mean, you can make blanket statements.
It's not a blanket statement. There's tons of data and examples.
We have in my city of Los Angeles, we had George Gascon, who was voted out in deference to Nathan Hochman, and so that's it. I mean, this is a true blue liberal bastion, and people here have spoken.
I'm glad we can agree on that. We look forward to having you back next time we're out of town. Brian, Tyler Cohen, thank you so much.
What makes this exchange so revealing is not the disagreement itself, but the structure of the argument. At the beginning, the discussion is built around emotional examples, violent crime, public safety, and fear. These are powerful topics, and they immediately capture attention. But once both participants establish that they agree on punishing violent criminals, the foundation of the original conflict begins to weaken. Because if both sides agree on the principle, then the real disagreement must exist somewhere else. And that somewhere else emerges when the conversation briefly shifts toward accountability and political figures. Instead of continuing down that path, the discussion quickly returns to safer territory: local crime, prosecutors, and policy. This shift is important because it shows how conversations can be guided away from uncomfortable questions and back toward familiar narratives. What you are witnessing here is not just a debate over crime policy. It is a demonstration of framing how the structure of a conversation determines what gets examined and what gets avoided. When crime is discussed in abstract terms, it becomes a political weapon. But when specific standards are applied universally, it becomes a question of consistency. And consistency is where political arguments are strongest or weakest. Because ultimately, the credibility of any argument depends on whether its principles apply equally to everyone or only selectively when convenient. This exchange doesn't resolve that question, but it makes one thing unmistakably clear. The real debate was never just about crime. It was about accountability. What do you think about this exchange? Do you believe the same standards were applied consistently throughout this conversation? Share your perspective in the comments below. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss future breakdowns.